This is going to be a two-part video, and this is part one of this video. I will leave a link to part 2 of this video in the description box below should you find this video interesting, and if you would be interested in watching part 2 of it. And before I start off with all that, Namaste, hello, and welcome back to another video on Hamsavahini, Vajraast. My name is Hoffman, and today's video is going to be about my pile of possibilities for Ancientsathon. Now, Ancientsathon is a month-long readathon which will be running during the entirety of June, and it's all about reading ancient classical literature which has been translated, and any literature which has been written before 17th century will be counted as ancient literature, or you could count it as medieval literature as well. And this readathon has been hosted this year by Jennifer, David, and Tori. I'll leave a link to the announcement videos in the description box below, as well as in the overhead cards above, for all of you to cross-check. Now, my TBR, or pile of possibilities, let's say, has been centered around Eastern ancient literature. So I'll be sharing all that and more. So do please join me further in this video. So now let's come around to the readathon itself. So our only criteria is to read any one classical work which has been written in any ancient language. However, there are 3 prompts which have been provided by our host as well. So we can read a work of poetry, we can read a work of non-fiction, or we can read a play. So I have chosen my pile of possibilities around the prompts to ensure that I have maximum variety in my pile of possibilities. And before I share them with you, I would like to also mention that I have some information written about the authors of these works in front of me, as well as the timelines which they belong to, because obviously I can't remember all of that in one go. So I'll be referring to that from here on as well. So the first poem that I've chosen is from classical Sanskrit literature, and that is Meghdutam. Now, this has been written by Kalidasa. Now, this poet was very popular between the 4th and the 5th century AD in the Indian subcontinent, and his works are legendary. One of his most important works is Meghdutam, which is Cloud Messenger. So this is a poem about a nature spirit called a yaksha. Now, yakshas were nature spirits who used to dwell in nature. They used to have dominion over forests, over trees, over rivers, etc. And they had their own kingdom, and they had a king as well. So our yaksha in question in this particular poem has committed a grave crime, because of which he is banished by his king Kubera into isolation. And he has this longing for his wife, and he feels very sad, and all his emotions are welling up within him. So he has to pass this message to his wife, and he requests a passing cloud to pass on this message to his wife, and the entire poem is about the message and how it is passed on to his wife. So it's a very beautiful poem, and I had heard this sung in Sanskrit. These were usually sung in Sanskrit, and I had heard this during my childhood, but I never really got my hands on reading an actual translation. So I'm very happy to get my hands on this particular version of it. So that will be the first poem that I'll be reading. The second poem is from the language Prakrit. Now, Prakrit is a language which precedes Sanskrit, and it is one of the vernacular languages which was spoken amongst the Indo-Aryan community. There were various forms of Prakrit, and the poem which I've selected is from the Maharashtri Prakrit poetry form, and this is called GathaSaptasati. Now, GathaSaptasati, which translates to the absent traveler, was compiled by a king from the Deccan region of the Indian subcontinent, which is the south region, from the Satavahana kingdom, called King Hala. And this is all about poems describing love and everything from a woman's point of view. So I'm not too sure if it has been written by women or not, but it's an anthology, so I'll be reading more about it, and I'll definitely share my views and thoughts upon this with all of you. Now, the third work which I have chosen is also by Kalidasa. However, this is one of his epic poems, and which is called Mahakavya, of course, and this is called Raghuvamsam. Now, Raghuvamsam is about the ancestry of the dynasty called Raghus, and Raghus was the dynasty or the line from which emerged Lord Rama, who on whom the entirety of the epic Ramayana is based. So I plan on reading this alongside reading Ramayana as well. Now, this is a very beautiful work which I have just come across, and it's illustrated. There are beautiful illustrations of it over here. I hope I'll be able to hold up this book, and here I hope you can see it, and it's actually beautiful, and I plan on completing this, so I will be reading most of this. I'll be starting this off very early, and so that I can complete it alongside alongside Raghuvamsam. So that is one of the other poems that I'll be reading. So these are the three poems that I'm reading from Sanskrit literature or Prakrit literature from the Indian subcontinent. Now, coming towards Chinese poetry or ancient Chinese poetry, I've selected one book of Chinese poetry which has been written by the famous Tang dynasty poets called Li Po and Tu Fu. Now, the Tang dynasty was the golden age of the Chinese literature, and between the 6th and the 9th century AD, of course. And Li Po and Tu Fu, they were contemporary poets, and their styles of poetry were absolutely opposite to each other. So Li Po was a romanticist, whereas Tu Fu was a realist, and Tu Fu's works were mostly based on or centered around the philosophy of Confucius. So I'm quite excited to start off with that one as well. And the next poem which I'll be reading is from ancient Japan, and it is a form of poetry which has evolved, and this is the Jisai. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Is the Jisai form of poetry, and it is also called Japanese deck poems, and this has been written by Zen monks and haiku poets on the verge of death. It has been compiled by Yeol Hoffman, of course, but these are all from the 10th century and 9th century, or maybe beyond, before that. So I have yet to receive my physical copy of this book, so hopefully that should be one of the very interesting works. And the other two works which I'll be reading of poetry will be from ancient Persia. The first is, of course, by the famous Sufi mystic poet Rumi, and this is the Essential Rumi, and this collection of poems, it's about 81 poems, and this is mainly focused upon the spiritual as well as the ecstatic poetic works. He has lots of forms of poetry, and this is specifically about the spiritual form of his poetry. And Rumi was, as we know, from the 13th century. He was a mystic, he was a Sufi saint, he was a theologian, he was also a jurist and an Islamic scholar. And the last poem is also from ancient Persian language, and this is by Nizami Ganjavi, who was a 12th century Muslim poet. And this is Laila Majnu, and this is a classical tale of forbidden love, which is much like Romeo and Juliet, but it's in ancient Persian. So these would be all the poems that I plan on reading, and I'll be moving on to part 2 now. Now, part 2 would obviously have the plays which I've selected, as well as the non-fiction work which I've selected. So do please join me further if you did find this video interesting, and I'll see you soon.